Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us again for our service today. As we continue now in the middle of July, in the midst of the pandemic, we continue to live stream only online, as I hope almost every other church is doing. I hope most churches have not decided to try to go back to meeting in person, since that would be very dangerous. I hope everyone is exercising caution, doing everything that you can to stay healthy. We do know that we now have more than 130,000 Americans who have died from the COVID infection, and the infection rate is shooting up in the Midwest and in the South. So please do be very, very careful. Also, I ask you to remember that as churches have stopped having public worship services and gone online, we depend on our viewers to make donations that allow us to continue to keep doing what we do. Our salaries, our overhead, everything has remained the same, just as if we were encouraging people to come and attend. So now all of our existence depends on our listeners being willing to make contributions, and I certainly hope that you'll be one of those. Thank you for your support.
This song, None of Us Are Free, by Solomon Burke. Well, you better listen, my sisters and brothers, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling across the years, and they're crying across the ocean, and they're crying across the land, and they still will be till all come to understand. None of us are free.
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 None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free. And there are people still in darkness, and they just can't see the light. If you don't say it's wrong, that says it's right. We got to try to feel for each other. Let our brothers know we care. Got to get the message, send it out loud and clear. None of us are free.
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 None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free. Now I swear your salvation isn't too hard to find. None of us can find it on our own.
On our own.
We've got to join together in the spirit, heart, and mind, so that every soul who's suffering will know that they're not alone. None of us are free.
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 None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free. If you just look around you, you're gonna see what I say, 'cause the world is getting smaller each passing day.
Each passing day.
Now it's time to start making changes, and it's time to realize that the truth is shining bright right before our eyes.
For our eyes.
None of us are free.
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 None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free. None of us are free.
None of us are free.
None of us are free.
None of us are free.
None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free.
None of us are free.
Oh my mind.
None of us are free.
Oh my mind.
None of us are free. One of us is changed. None of us are free. None of us are free.
Oh my mind.
None of us are free.
Oh my Lord.
None of us are free. One of us is changed. None of us are free.
of us are free.
None 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 of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free.
We confess that we have often allowed ourselves into believing that our preferences were inherently true and our opinions were wise, for no real reason beyond the fact that they are our preferences and our opinions. In a precarious time when much depends on good decision-making and noble leadership, we pledge ourselves to the task of transcending our own narcissism to be more congruent with what we know to be true.
This is Fear is a Villain by Theo Bard. What drives a man to lock his doors or bar his windows tight? To leave his light on timers so his house appears so bright. A 10-foot fence around his door and cameras on the wall. A fortress so secure that he can hardly get in at all. Fear is a villain when he grips you late at night. He'll catch you when your back is turned, he's watching you. What drives a man to jealousy, to beat his loving wife? What drives a man to hatred, to take another's life? What drives a man to spend his life regretting chances lost? When a man has lost his chance, what man can count the cost? Fear is a villain when it grips you late at night. He'll catch you when your back is turned, he's watching you. I'll fight the man that turns on me if I must fight or die. I will fight for justice and laws I can't abide. I'll try to fight with courage, to always give my best. For I must fight the fear itself that grows inside my breast. Fear is a villain when it grips you late at night. He'll catch you when your back is turned, he's watching you. So don't be afraid of the dark. Don't let those dark and lonesome voices speak to you. Don't be afraid of the dark. Just hold your head up high and that will see you through. Well, people talk of weapons, of threats to life and limb. They blame different ideals for the state that we are in. But fighting is fear's first one, son, is what the fear is for. Just undermine two people's trust and you can start a war. Fear is a villain when he grips you late at night. He'll catch you when your back is turned, he's watching you. So don't be afraid of the dark. Don't let those dark and lonesome voices get to you. Don't be afraid of the dark. Just hold your head up high and that will see you through.
The wisdom lesson today is written by Hannah Arendt, October 14, 1906 to December 4, 1975. She wrote this in 1962 when the New Yorker commissioned her, a Jew who had narrowly escaped from Nazi Germany, to travel to Jerusalem and report on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief architects of the Holocaust. You are quite right. I changed my mind and do no longer speak of radical evil. It is indeed my opinion now that evil is never radical, that it is only extreme, and that it possesses neither depth nor any demonic dimension. It can overgrow and lay waste the whole world precisely because it spreads like a fungus on the surface. It is thought-defying, as I said, because thought tries to reach some depth, to go to the roots, and the moment it concerns itself with evil, it is frustrated because there is nothing that is banality. Only the good has depth that can be radical.
In October of 1989, there was an earthquake in San Francisco, and a very old part of their freeway system, the Nimitz, collapsed. 11 people lost their lives in this incident. 39 people were trapped in their cars between the pancaked layers of the freeway, who were eventually rescued. Now, I remember when this happened. I was living in Louisville, Kentucky. My daughter was just 10 months old. I had a brand new doctorate and a very challenging career. And frankly, though I knew about it, I didn't think about it very much. Check your own feelings. Does it ask much of you to think about this horrible incident? Do you give it a lot of energy? A few years ago, I met a delightful single lady for dinner at a French restaurant about 50 miles west of town, which is not where you would expect to find a French restaurant, but it was actually quite good. She is a children's author who lives on a farm in the wilds of southern Missouri. She was one of the 39 people pulled from her car that day in San Francisco. She was a college student then, but after the incident, she found that she just couldn't concentrate on her schoolwork anymore. And rather than waste the money her parents had set aside for her education, she asked that she be allowed to take it and buy the most affordable tract of land that she could find to live in isolation to deal with the trauma of this event. She never married, never had kids. She did apply her considerable intellect to writing children's books, and from her isolation, she has had a very successful career. Now, I was evidently neither sufficiently charming nor interesting enough to entice her out to a second dinner, but we speak now and then. I called to check on her during the pandemic, once the stay-at-home orders had been issued. She laughed and said, "I was made for this. Staying at home alone is what I do." Now, I know that you were not at that dinner, and you might look at this image of the collapsed highway, but just knowing that I know someone that was stuck between those pancake layers, do you feel a little more about it? Knowing that an hour west of the city, there's a mature woman who is still, in a way, stuck between those layers of concrete and steel. But folks, what we know is that we all have a limited supply of empathy. We can only care about so much before we become emotionally exhausted. But if you spent a couple of hours with this author, you would remember the collapse of the Nimitz Freeway and the earthquake in San Francisco in October of 1989 somewhat differently. One of the most memorable and yet the most disturbing moments of my graduate school education was when my counseling professor, Dr. Liston Mills, said to me, "You try to tell yourself that you love all of your clients, but the fact is that no one can love more than 4 or 5 people at any time. If you're a saint, maybe you could love 7 or 8 people. So you have a caseload of 20 clients. Which ones do you really care about?" I argued with him, of course. That was my job back in those days. I argued with all my professors, but I, at that time, had more than 100 parishioners. I had 20 counseling clients. I had a dozen family members, and I just couldn't let Liston Mills be right about this. I thought he was being cruel. In fact, I don't even know how they got him to smile for this photo. He was my therapist, my advisor, and my professor for 8 years, and I never saw him smile. I thought, maybe Mills can't care about more than 4 or 5 people, but I can. But folks, Mills was always a lot smarter than I am, so don't be too quick to dismiss what he said. It doesn't feel good, but he was probably right. You wake up every day with a certain amount of emotional energy. Let's say we all wake up with 100 units of emotional energy that you can spend. You might spend some dealing with the people that you live with, just getting breakfast and getting dressed. Maybe some in traffic on the way to work. Maybe some dealing with staff members and peers. But then imagine that you're a therapist and you manage to make it to your desk with 80 of those units left to you. And the first thing you do is go to an intake group of 6 new patients in your addiction treatment program. Then you have to go up on the floor of the hospital and have individual meetings with patients for the next several hours. Maybe there was a suicide on the floor, and there's 8 or 9 family members waiting for you in a conference room, waiting for you to come in and tell them that their dad is not ever coming home. You're going to have to borrow some emotional energy from tomorrow to get through today. But then tomorrow's schedule looks an awful lot like today's schedule. And when you get home, your family is waiting for you, and they have every reason to expect something from you too. Now, that was my job when I was in my final year of my doctorate, when Liston Mills was telling me that I just couldn't begin to do what I thought I had to do every day. At that time, I had 3 patients on my floor in the VA hospital who had attempted suicide but who had not died. You can shoot yourself in the head and not die. You can lose a lot of your skull and still be alive. I always had 1 or 2 gunshot wound suicide attempts on my floor. But that day when he was confronting me about not really loving them, I realized that I could not even remember their names. And I'll tell you God's honest truth. I hated Liston Mills in that moment. I hated him because I did not want him to be right, but I knew that he was. So you all come here, congratulations, but you get here and I ask you to spend some of your emotional energy on remembering Trayvon Martin, Philando Castillo, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, George Floyd. I tell you about the Taliban who shot Malala right in the face when she was a kid. I've told you recently about Asian women who are being trafficked as prostitutes in local spas and massage parlors. I talk about the poor being manipulated by predatory lenders and tens of thousands of people who die from addiction to opioids. And I keep trying to get us to remember all those children separated from their families, living in dog kennels on the border. Frankly, I have to thank you for coming. You have to be brave to come here. This is not an easy place to come to. I ask for a lot out of you. I know that preachers are supposed to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, but I'm a lot better at afflicting the comfortable than I am at comforting the afflicted, and I sincerely apologize for that. But I have an assumption that spiritual people are always in training for a kind of empathy marathon. It was St. Bernard, the founder of the Trappist order of the Catholic Church, who said, "I love that I may love so that I may love," which is saying, I keep loving because loving makes me better able to love more and to be able to accomplish loving those that frankly don't always deserve it and are not always front of mind. I ask you to exercise your empathy, to make your spiritual heart stronger, to expand your grasp. But I know that sometimes you hear me talk about hashtag Me Too movement, then it's the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and then it's hashtag trans rights, and then I'm sure you've heard about black trans people being sexually harassed. So when I tell the very large and unmasked lady who is blocking the aisle at Sam's box store that 130,000 people have already died from COVID-19, would you please wear a mask? You can't really be surprised that she immediately issues an invitation for me to kiss a frankly shockingly enormous part of her anatomy, because everyone's not ready to care about me or you or the people in Sam's. We started this pandemic 4 months ago with panic buying of toilet paper and hand sanitizer, so that those who have no empathy for others hoarded basic necessities until literally our retail supply chain was broken. Now, 4 months later, it has devolved into a moral battle of the wearing of a mask in public to slow the spread of the virus. Those of us who have been exposed to spiritual thinking, to an assumption that empathy is always the right answer, most of us immediately jumped into this expert advice and began wearing masks in public. But noticeably around here, most folks didn't. I think it's getting better, but for the past several months, it has been the exception rather than the rule. Why is that? Why have people resisted wearing a mask in public? There was a piece in our paper this week about how retail stores are getting trapped in the middle of what has very ironically become a political divide. Customers at our local sort of hippie health food store, Mama Jean's, have gotten irate at clerks for wearing masks, vowing that they will not come back until they take them off. What on earth are they thinking? Now, wearing a mask is not a panacea. We should not think that it is like a force field that defends us. It isn't. But there is a lot of scientific and medical evidence to say that they help. There's no certain protection, but why would anyone be offended that someone else was at least putting forth the effort to wear a mask? It has, in the most mind-numbing way, become a division between Democrats and Republicans, between Trump supporters and Trump critics. I want to ask you to go back in time with me and remember when in 1982, almost 40 years ago, someone in Chicago put cyanide into some Tylenol capsules. 7 people in the Chicago area died as a result of this senseless crime. But when that happened, do you remember? Everyone across the United States stopped taking Tylenol. If you had any back in your medicine cabinet, you probably threw it away. And if you recall back in those days, you could pull a capsule apart and dump the powder out of it. They don't even make them that way anymore because it forced the over-the-counter medication industry to turn on a dime, changing how they made the capsules and how they packaged them, so that now Tylenol and everything else has a tamper-proof seal on it, everything from aspirin to seasoned salt. They even have some silly tear-apart film that they put on top of my cottage cheese carton that absolutely obligates you to get cottage cheese all over yourself getting it open. But no one in 1982 suggested that Democrats stop taking Tylenol and that Republicans take 2 every morning with their coffee. There was a known public health risk, so everyone took precautions. The industry made adjustments, and now I'm sure that if I had not brought it up, no one here ever thinks about those 7 people who died from cyanide poisoning in Chicago. But now we have 130,000 people who have died in the last 4 months from COVID-19. And the suggestion that you wear a mask in public to protect others in case you are infected has become a literal war, cast largely as the political left versus the political right. And no part of this makes any amount of sense. Why did we believe experts when they told us about Tylenol? But half of the country and the majority of our locals insist that their wishful thinking is now more reliable than the advice of experts. Now I want to tell you professionally, a sociopath is someone who lacks empathy. I'm asking that we have 2 or 3 times normal amounts of empathy. But a sociopath is someone who just doesn't even understand the equation. They don't feel it. And they will live in dangerous, sometimes even violent ways, and they just don't care about the consequences. We've all driven behind this person, right? The person that just really doesn't care about how anybody else in the world is being affected. Now, when I was in grad school, I was led to believe that only 2 or 3% of society could be diagnosed as a sociopath. Even then, we knew that 25% of corporate CEOs were sociopaths. But that's a subject for a whole nother sermon. I recently famously had a bit of a showdown with the director of the Council of Churches agency that we have volunteered with for more than a decade. The last time I showed up at Crosslines to work with our team of senior citizens, I saw that absolutely no one, not staff or volunteers, were wearing masks. And I got to tell you, I had a bit of a meltdown. I couldn't believe that they expected members of my church, some of whom were in their 80s, most of whom had underlying conditions that would, even if I or you came down with COVID-19, we would have a more than 50% chance of not living through it. And when I explained that to the manager, I was told that they were not required to wear them. They were not required. And I said, but it would reduce the chance of spreading the virus by 80 to 90% if everyone wears a mask. And her response was just a shrug of the shoulders. She said, you can wear one if you want to. I emailed the director and carefully explained to the director why he is a sociopath. I have not had a reply to that. But if knowing that wearing a mask protects vulnerable people, cutting their chance of infection by up to 90%, and you still don't want to wear one, if that makes you a sociopath, then 75% of the people who live here in the Ozarks are sociopaths. I want more than anything to be able to go back to the time when I believed that only 2 or 3% of society were sociopaths. I don't want to believe that most people in our community would really rather directly cause my death than for them to be inconvenienced by wearing a mask. Are they all sociopaths? Or maybe they are emotionally exhausted. Maybe I'm not on their list of 6 or 7 people that they can afford to care about today. Now, you may think that I was harsh for telling the director of Crosslines that he's a sociopath. I'm sure he thought so, but I'm not the only one to reach this conclusion. In research done by the Personality Laboratory at Whitman College, they are providing initial evidence that certain antagonistic personality traits are associated with ignoring preventative measures meant to halt the spread of the novel coronavirus. I'm not the only one who sees a direct connection between refusing appropriate preventative measures and sociopathy. Dr. Deborah Birx, the coordinator of the U.S. government's coronavirus task force, said, "There is no magic bullet. There's no magic vaccine or therapy. It's just behaviors. Each of our behaviors translating into something that changes the course of a viral pandemic." We don't have a vaccine. We have some marginally helpful treatments, but most of what we have in the face of this pandemic is exactly the same thing we had a century ago in the face of the Spanish flu. Everybody needs to wear a mask. Everybody needs to stay home as much as possible. And when you leave home, you must keep at least 6 feet between you and everybody else. It is only the behaviors of the population that can alter the spread of the virus right now. You want to see businesses reopen, retail shops reopen, you want to see movie theaters reopen, you want to see restaurants reopen. The only way that can happen is if we change our behaviors. You want to see the economy improve, you want to see the 40 million people on unemployment be able to go back to work. The only way that can happen is if we begin to feel some empathy for others and change our behaviors towards more compassionate lifestyles. Now, the people who get it can be pretty testy about this. I have been. As this sign in a restaurant window offers, to accommodate anti-maskers, we have provided a space 40 feet west where you can stare at your reflection in the window, since apparently you're the only person that you care about. I was in New York for a few days a couple of weeks ago, visiting friends from there and also friends who live there now who are from Russia and Brazil. My friends' daughters already think that I live so deep in the Ozarks that it's still the 16th century here. But sadly, while I was with them, the Ozarks was in the news 4 times in 5 days. The mayor of St. Louis literally provoked vigilante retaliation by reading out the names, addresses, and phone numbers of Black Lives Matter protesters on the internet. In response to that, there was a demonstration on the street where the mayor lives, and then walking down this very affluent neighborhood, these 2 attorneys came out in front of their house, one with a semi-automatic rifle and the other with a loaded pistol, and her finger on the trigger, pointing it at people who were just walking down the street. Now, I have to appreciate the Hamburglar costume, and I kind of wish that all attorneys had to wear that, just so we would know where they were. But that was in the news while I was with my friends in New York. But then the coup de grace was when the network news mentioned Joplin having a spike in virus infections from the meatpacking plant. And as the reporter finished reading the story on the TV news, she concluded by saying that the Joplin City Council had met and voted against a mask mandate for the city. And then she rolled her eyes in that way that was so familiar to me from having lived with a teenage cheerleader in my care. But of course, as infections are going up here, our city council is set to meet to discuss the same thing, and the only question is whether Springfield is as dumb as Joplin. Now, Joplin has reconsidered, and they have put a mask ordinance in place. But Monday night, our city council will take an IQ test. But what they are doing right now is they are asking people to write in their comments and views. Folks, have you ever taken a math test where you looked around the room and ask people what they thought the answer was? Because the majority view is not always the right answer, is it? That's not how you do science. You don't do it by voting. You don't do it by preference. But the city council is asking your opinion about whether they should allow lethal public conduct to continue or whether they should take action to protect us. In 1962, when the New Yorker decided to send the Holocaust survivor, Hannah Arendt, to Jerusalem to cover the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the leading architects of the Holocaust, she obviously had to sort through a lot of profound personal emotions, but she concluded in the midst of that trial that she would never again use the phrase radical evil, because radical technically means going to the tip of the root. And she found that evil was always much more shallow than that. Only good, she said, can be radical because goodness requires thought. It requires decision-making, intellect. It goes deeper than evil ever can. Evil, she says, spreads like a mold on society. It infects it. It literally ruins it. But it never gets much deeper than the surface. Evil, she concludes, is thought-defying. And in our day, I think we can say that evil, at least in public, is fact-denying. She is saying that Nazism, the kind of malice and racism that caused the Holocaust, was like a fungus that spread thinly across the surface of Germany, and as much harm as it did, historically speaking, it didn't seem to take very deep roots with anything but the most extreme of German people. When the war was over, very few people wanted to defend the agenda of the Nazis. I think we see a similar distancing of conservatives from Donald Trump coming now as the election draws near, and we will certainly see more of it by the end of the year. I am reasonably confident today, in the middle of July, that Trump will be defeated in November, in spite of the Democratic Party's best efforts at losing. And if anyone knows how to throw an election, surely the Democratic National Committee does. But I think that they will oust Trump in November, and we will be treated to a 2021 version of "I was only following orders" from virtually every elected Republican politician who failed to find a backbone, even though they have been given 4 years in which to do so. The denial of science on the part of Britain's Boris Johnson, Brazil's Bolsonaro, and our own accidental president, Donald Trump, has fed the virus, resulted in tens of thousands of completely unnecessary deaths. But on the surface, it has given hundreds of millions of people permission to simply not take the threat seriously, to avoid distancing, to not wear masks in public, and I have to suspect that they haven't been washing their hands all that much either. I don't want to believe that most of our neighbors are evil, even though they all have to know that if they would wear a mask, that they could save lives by not spreading the virus. I don't want to think that they're all stupid, even though I have wasted precious minutes reading social media posts by people who clearly could not have passed a middle school science test if it was an open book test and the answers were underlined, because they keep insisting that wearing a mask is either of no help or it is actually harmful. Not that I will ever be able to believe again that only 3 or 4% of society are sociopaths. I'm afraid I've accumulated too much evidence to the contrary in the past few months. But I do believe that there is a third option, and that is that people are, by and large, emotionally spent. They are neither ignorant nor malevolent, but they just can't love more than 4 or 5 people at once. And they can't care about hashtag #MeToo, hashtag Black Lives Matter, the kids at the border, the uninsured, the unemployed, the mentally ill, the environment, the pipeline in North Dakota, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and wear a mask to Sam's? Most of that stuff is filed in the back of their mind somewhere along with the collapse of the Nimitz Freeway and the tainting of Tylenol capsules. What we as spiritually oriented people must remember is that what we want from other people is not the impossible. We're not asking them to love hundreds of people. We're asking people to try to change some behaviors that will have a positive impact on the outcomes of the virus. And excuse me, my brothers and sisters, we are a self-selected crowd here, right? But don't we know by now that we have never changed a conservative into a liberal by judging them and humiliating them? When we make people feel stupid or judged or labeled, they almost always just double down on their self-destructive behaviors. People change their behaviors when they feel safe. People will change their minds about something, usually when they think it was their idea. Conservatives will never adopt liberal behaviors or views in order to satisfy the expectations of liberals. You do see that, don't you? Right now, the world is in the midst of a pandemic, which is a medical problem and an economic problem. But in Britain, Brazil, and the United States, we have politicians who see this medical and economic crisis as a political problem. And they are trying to solve it using the same bag of tricks that politicians usually use: propaganda, lies, and electoral suppression. We can't let ourselves be drawn into that battle. As the old saying goes, never get into a mudslinging fight with a pig. You'll just get dirty, and the pig likes it. There are those who want for us to believe that there will be a medical resolution to the pandemic in the next 6 or 7 months, either as a vaccine or as effective treatments or both. And I hope they are right. But the fact that there is now many different kinds of coronaviruses in the world, and no one has ever succeeded in developing a vaccine for any of them. And HIV is a virus that's been around for 40 years, and there's still not a vaccine for that, though we have come up with good treatments in the last few years. But COVID-19 may be a part of our world for a year or two or a decade. Folks, this hurts me to say it, but church may never be the same. Concerts, restaurants, live music venues, theaters may never be the same. The one thing that we can do to help the world maintain meaning and joy and romance and culture and faith is to change our behaviors. And if I may quote our friends in the AA movement, sometimes you have to fake it to make it. Maybe your heart just isn't in it. Maybe you're just not full of compassion and empathy for everyone jostling their shopping carts down the grocery store aisle. But you can fake it until you can make it. Maybe you're emotionally spent and you just can't care about the off chance that you are asymptomatic and throwing off a deadly virus onto unsuspecting strangers. And I would challenge you to read in the newspaper every week when they list the new coronavirus diagnoses that they describe each one: asymptomatic, not wearing a mask, went to Walmart. If you can do anything to protect yourself, don't go to Walmart, because everybody that gets infected evidently goes straight to Walmart. But people start shedding the virus before they get sick. So play along. Even if you don't feel sick, even if you don't really care about other people, play along. Fake it. Wear a mask and stay 6 feet apart from other people. Make it fun if you can. Draw funny picture on your mask. Buy a superhero mask. Just choose to pretend that you are a better person than you are right now. And if you can keep pretending for a few weeks, the surprising thing is you will wake up and discover that you actually are a better person. And you never want to go back to being the knuckle-dragging, mouth-breathing narcissist that you were before. Because no one really wants to be a sociopath. I know you may find that hard to believe, so let me invite you to prove me wrong. Just do the right thing for a month and see if you ever really want to go back to being who you were before. Wear a mask. If you have to, try to find one that matches your eyes.
This next song is actually a parody. I think you'll recognize the tune. But the lyrics are by a man named Randy Rainbow. You can probably guess by the words who he's talking about, but in case you don't know, it's Trump. So let's give it a whirl. You're looking awful grouchy. Cover your freaking face. Listen to Dr. Fauci. Cover your freaking face. Don't wait around for herd immunity, you reckless thug. And what a golden opportunity to hide that mug. Although you should require us to do what's right to do, you're siding with the virus, 'cause you're a virus too. So back up, girl, don't get in my space, and cover your freaking face. And if you're feeling fancy, you're on your way to prom, why not be more like Nancy and make it a whole ensemble? Tie up your face with a bandana, please. It's not taboo. Think of your poor old ailing Nana. She's counting on you not to kill her. Please don't politicize it. Don't be a putz like Pence. Don't sit and scrutinize it. It's only common sense. Don't spread droplets all over the place. Ew! Cover your freaking face. And in the same way testing less would make COVID just quit, maybe if we can't see your mouth, you won't say stupid shit. Don't thumb your nose at science, you'll find it doesn't work. Knock off that non-compliance, and don't be a selfish jerk. Stop your drooling and slow down the pace. Just cover your freaking face. Cover your freaking face.
Folks, I always enjoy being with you. I look forward to these opportunities to share with you through the internet. Please be careful, but when you go, go in peace to love and to serve. Amen.